we're going to jump right in. Hey, everybody. I'm Alejandro. I'm the CEO and founder of Springboard Collaborative. Thanks to Upswell for having me. Thanks to you all for joining. And thanks to my colleague Megan for running the slides. We're going to jump right in because our 20 minutes are going to fly by. The first half will be me sharing an idea. And then the latter half will be Q&A. And we'll be relying on the chat feature to get those questions from you. But yeah, let's jump right in. Parents' love for their children is the single greatest and the most underutilized natural resource in education. I see this in my work every day, but I learned it first as a son. And Megan, you can jump to the next slide. Megan, I saw your text that I'm off camera. I can see myself on camera.
Now you're okay. You're good now.
Okay, great. Sorry. We did a tech check and everything went off without a hitch during the tech check. And of course, when we're live, life happens. But anyhow, those are my parents on the left. And that's me, baby me, on my mom's lap. In 1973, my dad was taken as a political prisoner in his native Chile. His crime, writing and directing Libertad, Libertad, a play in protest of Pinochet's dictatorship. As you might imagine, Pinochet was less than amused. After years of torture in a military prison, my father made it out alive. He was luckier than many. Even luckier, he met my mom. My mom is from Puerto Rico, the youngest of 12, and the first in her family to go to college. Like so many immigrants, my parents came to America so their kids could have better educational opportunities, even though it meant giving up their own theater dreams. The market for Spanish language social justice theater in Carrollton, Georgia, isn't exactly booming. It's the kind of sacrifice that only a parent would make. After quickly realizing that not every public school delivers on the promise of educational opportunity, my parents hightailed to New Jersey with a new strategy. We'd rent the cheapest house in an overwhelmingly white and affluent community with a high-performing public school. My sister and I excelled in spite of the school, not because of it. My parents may sound erudite the way that I tell their story, but my teachers only ever treated them as pushy immigrants that didn't belong in the school system. Frankly, the same way my classmates treated me. My sister and I overcame the circumstances of our birth because of my parents' tireless advocacy in the face of systemic oppression. In fact, the guidance counselor at my high school tried to talk me out of applying to Harvard to, quote, avoid the disappointment of rejection. Later that year, she seemed quite disappointed to see my acceptance letter. Were it not for my parents pushing and advocating on behalf of my sister and me, we would have never overcome the circumstances of our birth. After graduating, I joined Teach for America and I became a first grade teacher in a Puerto Rican neighborhood in North Philly. Those are my kids. They're on the right. In my students, I saw myself, and in their parents, I saw my own. The connection was deeper than even our shared language, culture, and experience of childhood poverty. It was the timeless truth you see in the eyes of any parent. My students' parents gazed at their children with the same unconditional love, unbridled optimism, and unwavering commitment with which my parents had gazed at me. The same eyes with which my sister gazes at my nieces, the very same eyes with which my wife and I gaze at our 4-month-old Alma. My students' parents, like my own, understood deeply the importance of their children's educational success. In their kids, they saw an opportunity for a better life than their own, an easier life, one full of choices, not struggles. As a teacher, I soon became frustrated that our school system treats Black and brown parents like mine as liabilities rather than as assets. And Megan, you can move to the next slide. The education sector tends to view a child's home life as a risk to be mitigated, not a resource to be cultivated. And I knew we were missing a massive opportunity. Picture a child's time as an orange. Students are in the classroom for just 25% of their waking hours. It's a pretty small wedge from which the education sector is fixated on squeezing more and more juice. I became more interested in working with families to juice the rest of the orange. Kids spend 75% of their waking hours outside of school, and yet our education system does shockingly little to capture instructional value from that time. Never has that been more painfully apparent than during school closures over the last couple of years. Among the pandemic's biggest lessons is this: when it comes to educating kids, there's no going around parents. Teachers have to work with them and through them to ensure students learn across a continuum of home and school. Though school systems are only recently awakening to this fact, it's always been true. Research shows that parental involvement in their children's learning is a more powerful predictor of academic success than any other variable, including social class and level of parental education. For more than a century, our society has bet big that school improvement could close the achievement gap. It simply isn't enough. Fourth grade literacy rates in the US, they haven't budged for 25 years, and academic disparities are widening despite billions invested in classroom intervention. I founded Springboard Collaborative a decade ago to close the literacy gap by harnessing the untapped teaching potential within families. We coach educators and parents to team up and help their kids learn to read by fourth grade. In a nation where you can draw a straight line from fourth grade reading scores to incarceration rates, this changes lives. Since launching, Springboard has grown its reach from 40 to 20,000 kids across 80 cities. We work with struggling readers in Title I school districts. In short, with the marginalized families from which the education sector expects the least. In schools that often struggle to get 20% of parents to show up at report card conferences, Springboard's weekly family workshops average 90% attendance. For every hour that a teacher leads a workshop, parents deliver 25 hours of tutoring at home. The result? Kids average a 3 to 4 month reading gain during each 5 or 10 week program cycle, closing the gap to grade level performance by more than half. Moreover, families and teachers build habits that stick. Even 6 months after each program cycle has ended, parents are still coaching their kids in reading every bit as much, every bit as often. Springboard's Recipe for Impact is a method that we open sourced, and we call it Family-Educator Learning Accelerators, or FELAs for short. FELAs are 5 to 10 week cycles during which teachers and parents team up to help kids reach learning goals. And they've got 6 basic steps. None of them are going to be groundbreaking, and yet together, they're really powerful. Step 1, build relational trust between educators and families. You can do that through in-person home visits, through virtual team building huddles, but you don't get far without trust. Step 2, families and educators need a shared understanding of students' learning baseline so that they can set an ambitious but achievable growth goal in step 3. That goal needs to be quantitative, for example, moving from one level to the next, and achievable, winnable, within 5 to 10 weeks. Fewer than 5 weeks, it's not long enough to build a habit. Longer than 10 weeks, and the finish line is too far away to motivate behavior change. Step 4, practice, practice, practice. Over that 5 to 10 weeks, kids need to practice with their educators, whether it's in person or virtual, whether it's with a teacher or a tutor. Kids also need to practice with their families for at least 15 minutes per day at home. Springboard's app provides daily guidance to families so that even a parent who isn't themselves a reader can still be a confident reading tutor at home. Finally, the whole team, families and educators, they need to practice together at least 4 times over the course of the cycle to share skills and create mutual accountability. Step 5, the end of all that practice, you got to measure each student's progress relative to their goal. And the very final step, 6, is to end with a celebration. Experiencing that quick win is what crystallizes lasting habits. That's true for educators for whom the light bulb goes off, parents or the co-teachers that I never realized I had. And that's also true for parents who have the transformative experience of setting and achieving a goal with their child, sometimes for the very first time. This, of course, has implications far beyond literacy. Families setting and achieving goals together creates a virtuous cycle and an upward spiral. Small wins lead to big wins. School systems should implement FELAs 3 times a year, a 5-week cycle during the summer to prevent regression, a 10-week cycle in the fall once teachers have identified the kids that most need a boost, and a 10-week cycle in the spring to sprint through the finish of the school year. At Springboard, we're taking a 3-pronged approach to solve the problem at the scale at which it exists. That is for the 10 million low-income, predominantly Black and brown children lacking the foundational literacy skills to have a fair shot. You can think of our approach as having these 3 concentric spheres: direct, widespread, and systemic impact. I'll briefly run through each because we've been doing a lot of learning on this front. So direct impact. Like most nonprofits, we started with a direct service program. Springboard runs summer and after school programs that use the FELA method to accelerate kids' learning while helping parents and teachers to sharpen their instructional skills. These programs feature Springboard's most intensive support. They're impactful, but direct service is inherently limited in its potential to scale. You don't need a crystal ball to know that really any direct service program model is destined for a logarithmic growth curve. Direct impact is necessary, but it's insufficient to solve the problem at scale. That's why in 2019, Springboard set a goal that was deliberately unachievable with our direct service program model to 10x in 5 years. Our intent was to force Springboard to find a way to scale our impact exponentially rather than fixating on incrementally growing our program. So we started by disassembling the Lego castle, all the components that make up our intensive direct impact program. We spread out the pieces in front of us. There were 221 little parts. And for every single one, we categorized them in one of 3 ways. Either it's critical exact, you need to do this and you need to do it our way. It's critical flexible, you can do this your own way. And non-critical, it's a bell or whistle that you can do without. And that's how we removed cost and complexity from the original model until we had a simple and streamlined program that could be franchised. That's what we call widespread impact at Springboard. It's a train-the-trainer model through which we work through others to implement FELAs more independently and more affordably. Frankly, if we hadn't developed that low-cost franchising model, the pandemic could have been an existential threat to our organization. Instead, we were able to turn it into a tailwind and grow exponentially. So briefly, we've been able to use that model to help kids not only avoid regression during school closures, but instead make significant gains. The graph that you see on there is a study we did where we looked at iReady Lexile scores, reading scores from before the first shutdown and again in the next fall for both a treatment group that were doing kind of the light touch, low cost program, as well as a control group. And the treatment group averaged a 256 point gain relative to a control group that grew just 41 points. The fact that the treatment group made more than 6 times the progress of the control group is a testament to the power of the FELA method. Family engagement can be a force multiplier that enables schools to dramatically improve their outcomes with the people and assets that are already within their school community. Turns out that when parents and teachers work together, they can turn the COVID slide into a springboard. The extension from direct to widespread impact is a breakthrough for us because it demonstrates that the playbook works when other people use it, not just when we're running our own plays. However, even a franchised program is limited in its scaling potential. And the problem we're trying to solve is measured in the millions. So that's why we've also focused on making systemic impact. Ultimately, Springboard seeks to weave the FELA method into the fabric of the American education system so that parent-teacher collaboration becomes the rule, not the exception. We envision FELAs as standard practice across grades and subject areas, as ubiquitous as parent-teacher conferences. You should be able to walk into any school in America and see parents and teachers working in tandem rather than in isolation to accelerate student learning. So to bring that vision to life, here's what we're working on. We're pursuing grass tops and grassroots strategies, both on the supply side, that is increasing the quantity of educators and families with the skill of engaging in FELAs, as well as the demand side, creating policies and practices that increase the demand for parent-teacher collaboration. So the grass tops on the supply side, Springboard is partnering with institutions that already have much larger distribution than we do to teachers and families. And we're plugging the FELA method into these institutions, almost like the intel inside that'll help to accelerate their impact through family engagement. These kinds of partnerships include grad schools of education like Relay, alternative certification pathways like Teach for America, and nonprofits like Horizons National. By working through networks, we can spread the FELA method more efficiently than if we tried to build all that distribution ourselves. On the demand side, policy is the name of the game. Only 17 of 50 states currently name family engagement as a requirement for licensing teachers. That means that every other state doesn't expect teachers to know how to work with families. That has to change. At the grassroots, on the supply side, Springboard is building a tech platform that guides educators and families through all 6 steps of the FELA method. We call it Springboard Connect. And we think that software can be the key to helping family educator teams collaborate without all of the support and the expense that comes along with programs. Finally, at the grassroots on the demand side, Nothing changes if we don't see a groundswell of families and teachers that are demanding change. And maybe the biggest impasse is the one that you least expect: data transparency. According to research from Learning Heroes, 93% of K-8 parents think their kid is reading on grade level, but only a third of kids actually are reading on grade level. Low-income parents, in particular, they're flying blind. They may not realize their kids are falling behind, which makes it really hard for them to advocate for their kids. That's why Springboard's developing a parent-facing literacy screener, PFLS, or PIFLs, if you will, that families can use to assess and understand their children's reading development, so that any parent anywhere can see for themselves how their kid is doing as a reader. And we're betting that that can unleash an enormous amount of parent advocacy that's currently trapped by a lack of better information. If there's a silver lining in how the pandemic disrupted schools, it's that we've got a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to reinvent education in America. Let's not reach for the familiar set of interventions that have only ever failed to move the needle. Let's rebuild the school system so that parent-teacher collaboration becomes the rule, not the exception. For my parents, the experience of sending their kids to school was a decades-long fight against the system. My family was constantly made to feel other and less than. As a brand new parent, I dream of a more equitable school system, one in which teachers and I work arm in arm to help my daughter realize her full potential. Thank you. I'm eager to look in the chat now to see if there are any questions that we can tackle. I know we've just got a couple minutes. I didn't do well to leave more time. I appreciate the comments. I don't see any questions yet, but I'll give it a few. That's a great question, to which I don't have a great answer. So right now, our strategic plan is focused on the transition from direct to widespread impact. So that's kind of our focus. We're doing a lot of innovating and learning on the systemic impact side, but we're further ahead in terms of building our tech and building the family-facing literacy assessment, as well as the partnerships with large institutions. Those are the bets that we've been investing in. Policy is the area where it's just not our area of focus yet. What I will say is that there are lots of organizations that are very much focused on this, that are doing much better work than we are in that regard. Learning Heroes is one of them. NAFSCI, the National Association of Families, Something and Community Engagement, also does a lot of great work. So we've written a few policy papers in collaboration with them. And America Forward is a group that we're a part of through the New Profit Network that also lives and breathes policy. We've got time for maybe one last question. And Maya, if you have ideas for how we can engage in policy conversations, please do reach out. What types of organizations have we worked with? Great question. We typically work with school districts all over the country. More recently, we started working also at the state level. So in Massachusetts, we have a statewide partnership to launch a literacy tutoring initiative there. And we also contract with individual schools. So by and large, schools are how we do our work. More recently, through the systemic impact work, we've started working with other institutions that also reach kids, families, and educators. So examples there are we partnered with Teach for America, and we trained all 3,000 of their income and core members to learn how to work with families as part of their pre-service training. Relay is a group that we're excited to work with to embed the FELA method into their kind of student teaching practicum. Horizons is a new partnership that we're getting off the ground to kind of embed FELA into the great programming that they do already. So that's a new pathway through which we can reach kids and families by kind of embedding FELA into other organizations. We're about to start doing work in Colorado, so please do reach out and we can have a conversation about that. I think I've overstayed my welcome. That's our time, but I really appreciate everyone for joining. And I'm going to put my contact info in the chat if anybody wants to continue the dialogue. Thank you so much, y'all.